Republicans held a congressional hearing about welfare fraud in Minnesota's Somali community, while at the same time blocking an investigation into Trump's alleged misconduct, shielding files about his alleged misconduct involving a minor, waving through a conflict with Iran launched without congressional approval that has already killed 6 American service members, and currently being hit with a legal demand from their own oversight committee to explain why nearly 48,000 documents related to the financier's case quietly disappeared from a publicly available government website, including the ones that mentioned Trump. They called this hearing to stick it to Tim Walz, and all they managed to do was hand a Democratic freshman a 5-minute window to light the entire Republican Party on fire from the inside. What you're about to watch is a freshman congressman walking into what was designed as a Republican victory lap, a hearing meant to embarrass Tim Walz and validate Trump's years of divisive rhetoric about Somali immigrants in Minnesota, and then carefully tearing apart the whole point of the hearing using Republicans' own record against them. Representative Dave Min had 5 minutes, Committee Chairman Comer wanted him to wrap it up, and a list of things Republicans are not investigating that is genuinely longer than the list of things they are. This was recorded March 4th, and the context you need going in is that on this exact same day, the Senate was voting on a war powers resolution to rein in Trump's military strikes in Iran, launched without congressional approval. The Department of Justice had just admitted to removing 47,635 documents from a publicly available government website, including pages about allegations against Trump, and 2 American citizens had already been murdered in Minneapolis by federal immigration agents with not a single suspension or investigation to show for it. Let's watch this hearing, and I will break it down later.
Now, Chair recognizes Mr. Min from California.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for convening this hearing. Let's start at the outset by just stating the obvious. Waste, fraud, and abuse are horrible. They're stealing from taxpayers. They're taking money and food out of the mouths of hungry kids. I have spent my career fighting against fraud. I started my career at the SEC, prosecuting corporate fraud, continued on as a law professor, teaching the next generation. And as someone on the Oversight Committee, this is a very, very important issue to me. Again, every dollar that is stolen from these programs is a dollar that's not just taken from us hardworking taxpayers. It is something that is meant for a better use. And so I appreciate the gist of this hearing, but as I pointed out in prior hearings on allegations of fraud in Minnesota, the singular and exclusive focus on the Somalian community in Minnesota seems very partisan and wrong, because we know there's massive fraud across this country, particularly in southern states, including states like Florida and Mississippi. Mississippi is still at trial right now, over $77 million in welfare fraud. Federal prosecutors have recently arrested a Russian national accused of submitting billions of dollars in fraudulent schemes in Texas and Florida. And of course, Oklahoma and Alabama consistently rank as the highest states when it comes to SNAP fraud. And yet we've only focused on Minnesota. Why? As a freshman member, I've been here 14 months, but I've learned that their House Republicans are all single-issue voters with just a handful of exceptions. And that single issue, the only thing that you all care about, is whether you're on Team Trump or not. And so when Donald Trump goes after Minnesota and falsely claims that he won the election there 3 times and that it was rigged against him, I pay close attention. When he says that he would no longer admit Somalians to this country because they contribute, quote, nothing to this country, I listen. That's a wildly racist statement, but it's going to reflect what Republicans are going to do, and that is why we're holding this hearing. I care about welfare fraud, and I care about the scumbags who rip off taxpayer money. But if this was about welfare fraud, we'd be also hauling in people like Mississippi Governor Tate Reeves and former NFL quarterback Brett Favre, who clearly knew about a scheme to send money to build a volleyball facility at the college his daughter was playing at, receive funds for $600,000 or more for work that he never did from the government, again, taking money from the mouths of children that are hungry. No, this hearing is not about welfare fraud. It's about placating Donald Trump. This committee is holding this hearing for the same reasons that it's ignoring the massive corruption we know that Donald Trump is engaged in his family, soliciting bribes from foreign governments and private companies in exchange for regulatory favor, for the same reason that Republicans are protecting pedophiles right now and that the DOJ is right now actively deleting Epstein files while we're at war with Iran. It's why they ignore their oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. It's why we're holding hearings on this rather than on ICE abuses or the fact that Donald Trump just took us into war without even consulting with Congress, let alone getting our authorization for military use or force or actual declaration of war in direct contravention of the Constitution of the United States. But for those of us who care about taxpayer dollars, let's focus on that. This is horrible, but of course we have seen instead a different type of abuse of our taxpayer dollars. They've taken our taxpayer dollars and used them to fund abuses against our American people, as a number of our witnesses have aptly described. And I want to just point out that until the murder of Alex Pretti, not a single DHS or ICE agent accused of wrongdoing, witnessed or videotaped assaulting Americans was suspended, faced any disciplinary action. That doesn't happen with police. When my local law enforcement are accused of misconduct, certainly if they're videotaped shooting someone, they are subject to an investigation. Maybe they're justified or not, but they're suspended, removed from duty, investigated. None of that has happened until the murder of Alex Pretti and the outrage around that. Now, Governor Walz, I want to just briefly ask you, what's the economic impact that the deployment of ICE in Minnesota has had over the past few months?
Well, thank you, Congressman. I thank you for your characterization. I associate myself with you on fraud is horrific. It is corrosive. It hurts those people that are there, and taxpayers should demand accountability. And I think that's what we're trying to take. The issue can, again...
What's the economic impact? I know business...
Look, for us, we just had our economic numbers, and I would tell people that we have to balance the budget every year. Minnesota is strongly, we're AAA bond rated. That shows up good. It doesn't account for what happened over the last 3 months. And by estimates, the city of Minneapolis estimates they lost $200 million alone. And I remind people, you saw pictures of Minneapolis. This happened across the state. Near my hometown of Mankato, Minnesota, in St. Peter, we saw a woman that was pulled over at gunpoint, a citizen. The chilling effect it had, businesses going under, especially immigrant-owned businesses, people who are here legally, citizens, starting businesses. We're shut down.
I'm just going to reclaim my time to make one final point here. I was at Minneapolis, had the chance to meet with you and others. I also met with a number of local police chiefs, and one of the things they told me, first, this is not the first time ICE has operated in Minnesota. But in the past, what is different about this time is that they did not coordinate. They did not tell anyone. And that resulted in a lot of 911 calls, because when you see masked men jumping out of vans, pulling people out, assaulting them, punching them in the head, as happens all the time with ICE agents. And by the way, that's not a matter of training. It's a matter of picking people who are predisposed to violence. That costs our local police quite a lot of money. It's one of the reasons I'm going to be introducing the Recoup Act so that local jurisdictions are repaid for the funds that they expend due to ICE misconduct. With that, I yield back.
Gentlemen, yield back. Before I recognize Ms. Boebert.
If you're sitting there feeling like you just watched someone say out loud everything you've been screaming at your phone for the past 6 months, you're not wrong. And more importantly, you're not alone, because every single thing Dave Min said in that chamber is not only true, it is, if anything, not going far enough. So let me give you what the clip didn't. Start with those case files, because that moment landed and most people don't have the full picture. Min said the Department of Justice is actively deleting documents while we're involved in a conflict with Iran. What he's referring to is this. According to an NPR investigation published on February 24th, the Department of Justice quietly removed 47,635 files from its publicly available government website, including documents containing allegations that he committed misconduct against a minor. The Department of Justice admitted to removing nearly 48,000 files, with links to offline files now returning a page not found error, and the removed files included various claims against him. The Department of Justice's official line is that they were just doing redactions to protect victims. But here's the catch. NPR found that among the withheld material was what appears to be more than 50 pages of FBI interviews, including notes from conversations with a woman who accused him of alleged misconduct against her when she was underage, with the FBI interviewing her 4 times. Trump himself signed the relevant Transparency Act into law after opposing it for months, and that law requires the Department of Justice to make all of this public. They have not done that. And as of this week, the House Oversight Committee approved a motion to hit Attorney General Pam Bondi with a legal demand to answer questions about the Department of Justice's handling of its investigations. So the committee that James Comer is using to investigate Minnesota welfare fraud is at the same time going after his own party's Attorney General. You could not write this, or I guess technically you could, but no publisher would buy it because the note would come back too on the nose. Now, let's talk about the Iran conflict, because the word war is doing a lot of work in this conversation, and Republicans are trying to slither around it. On February 28th, he launched what he called major combat operations against Iran. without a declaration of war, without a congressional vote, without even notifying the vast majority of Congress before the strikes began. The ACLU notes that the Constitution gives Congress the sole authority to declare war, except in truly rare situations where the country is under an active attack or facing immediate danger, and there has been no credible indication those circumstances existed before he launched strikes against Iran. The Republican-controlled House then narrowly voted 219 to 212 to reject a war powers resolution that would have required congressional approval for further military action, with only two Republicans, Thomas Massie and Warren Davidson, breaking with him. Senator Andy Kim said after Tuesday's classified briefing that Trump owns the results of this conflict, including the death of 6 United States service members. 6 Americans are already dead in a conflict that Congress never authorized, and the House Oversight Committee's response was to haul in Tim Walz to talk about snap fraud. There's a word for that. Several, actually. None of them are flattering. And then there's Alex Pretti, whose name Min mentioned, and whose story deserves more than a passing reference. Alex Jeffrey Pretti was a 37-year-old intensive care nurse at the Veterans Affairs Hospital in Minneapolis, with an active nursing license, a Minnesota state permit to carry, and no criminal record, who was murdered by Border Patrol agents on January 24th, while filming federal agents conducting an immigration enforcement operation. His administration immediately labeled him a threat, claiming he intended to carry out an attack on officers. But ABC News analyzed video showing that 3 minutes before the first shot was fired, Pretti was holding a phone, not a weapon, and the footage appears to contradict federal officials' claims that he approached officers with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun and attacked them. One video shows that an agent removed the firearm from Pretti's waist before he was shot. His parents released a statement calling the administration's account sickening lies. Not a single agent was suspended, disciplined, or removed from duty. And the Department of Justice notably refused to launch a federal investigation into the killing of Renee Good, an earlier victim, but instead began investigating Good and her wife's ties to activist groups. That's the pattern Min is describing, and it's exactly as bad as it sounds. So what does all of this actually mean for you? Here's the most concrete, dollars and cents version of what Representative Min was describing when he asked Walz about economic impact. The city of Minneapolis released an official assessment finding that in 1 month alone, Operation Metro Surge, the name for the federal immigration enforcement operation that sent up to 3,000 agents into Minneapolis neighborhoods, caused at least $203.1 million in damage, including losses to small businesses, workers' wages, housing stability, food security, and mental health services. That breaks down to $81 million in lost revenue for small businesses and restaurants, $47 million in lost wages for people afraid to leave home, and $4.7 million in hotel cancellations, extending through the summer. And city officials were clear. Those numbers almost certainly don't capture the full damage. Minneapolis's director of emergency management warned that 20% of the city's residents urgently needed food assistance. That's the price of a political stunt designed to make him feel validated about an election he lost. The election he lost 3 times, according to him, which still isn't a thing that's happened. What's at stake for our Constitution here is serious, and that's not an exaggeration. The Brennan Center for Justice noted this week that Trump's one-man decision to launch military strikes against Iran violates the Constitution and the founding principles of this country, and that Congress's failure to respond to earlier power grabs made this latest and far more dangerous one possible. The War Powers Resolution of 1973 exists precisely because Congress decided after Vietnam that no single president should have the power to take the country into a conflict alone. He has now done this multiple times, launching strikes against Venezuela, against Nigeria on Christmas Day, and now Iran, and each time Congress has blinked. As the Council on Foreign Relations wrote this week, our country has given one person enormous unchecked freedom to use the military in ways that can easily lead to a massive conflict, and the main question is whether the current situation in Iran sets a new high watermark for presidential power. Seriously, what is this for? The stated reason for the Minnesota hearing is welfare fraud. But, to quote the Republicans' own logic, Mississippi is literally on trial right now for $77 million in welfare fraud. Brett Favre received $1.1 million in government welfare money, confirmed by the Mississippi State Auditor, for speeches he never gave, from a program meant to feed hungry children, and his daughter's volleyball facility got built. Where's that hearing? Where's the Brett Favre hearing? The answer is that there is no Brett Favre hearing, because Brett Favre is not a Somali immigrant and he didn't lose Mississippi 3 times. That's the whole thing. That's the entire explanation. He needed someone to blame for an election result his ego couldn't process, pointed at Minnesota's Somali community, and called them people who contribute, and I'm quoting directly here, nothing, adding, "I don't want them in our country." And the Republican Party built a congressional hearing around it. They could have spent this time addressing an ongoing conflict. They had a conflict to be focused on. It's worth flagging what Representative Ro Khanna and Representative Thomas Massie, the bipartisan pair who fought to get those case files released in the first place, said this week. They co-authored the War Powers Resolution that the House just voted down 219 to 212. That's the same two members who forced those documents out of the Department of Justice and then watched the Department of Justice quietly remove 47,635 of them, including the ones mentioning him. When Massie and Khanna are standing together saying the president is withholding evidence and launching military operations without congressional approval, and the Republican Party is voting to let both things continue, that is not a partisan observation. That is a bipartisan one. And the fact that only 2 Republicans would join them tells you everything you need to know about where the modern Republican Party's priorities actually live. As of this hearing on March 4th, 2026, the United States is engaged in a military conflict with Iran that has killed at least 6 American service members. The Department of Justice has quietly removed nearly 48,000 documents, including allegations against the president. 2 American citizens have been fatally shot in Minneapolis by federal agents with no accountability. The city of Minneapolis has documented over $203 million in economic damage from a federal operation designed to please one man's political ego. And Congress just voted not to do anything about any of it. This isn't really about Somalian welfare fraud. It was never about welfare fraud. This is about whether the party in charge of Congress can be turned into a tool. Not to do real oversight, but to put on a show of loyalty, to hold the right hearings, ignore the right problems, and look the other way at the right moments in exchange for the president's backing come election time. Dave Min said it directly. The single issue that determines everything Republicans do is whether you're on Team Trump. And the reason that's so dangerous is that there are a lot of things that are supposed to happen in a democracy that require at least some members of the majority to occasionally remember that they work for the country, not the president. What's darkly funny, and I use funny loosely, in the same way you use fine when you're clearly not fine, is that Republicans called this hearing to embarrass Tim Walz and instead created a 5-minute floor speech that is going to be played in political science classrooms for 20 years. They handed a freshman Democrat a megaphone, a list of their greatest failures, and an unlimited microphone. You know who could have warned them not to do that? Brett Favre. Brett Favre knows something about receiving gifts you didn't earn and then having it come back to bite you. The difference is he at least threw a good spiral on his way out. If you found this video informative, please take a moment to like, comment, and share it with others who should see it. Your support helps more people stay informed and keeps this conversation going. Don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe so you never miss a new video. Thanks for watching.